Hey everybody, this is Brian here. We're going to be going over my top 20 favorite wrestlers of all time. We've gone through some of the best names in the history of the business, Hall of Famers to underrated people that you may not have thought of as all time greats. This is not an all time greats list, by the way. This is just personal opinion, no particular order, as I've said. And let's get to it. Um, again, uh, love wrestling. A big part of my life is my fandom to wrestling, and I'm really reverent towards these guys for what they've um, given of themselves and of their time and blood, sweat, and tears to the good of the business and to all of our entertainment. And that might seem a little bit, like the Roman Colosseum, a little bit bloodthirsty or something, but I more mean in the sense of appreciation and in the sense of, starting a match with, we want tables. And it's like, yeah, it's like they'll get to it. It's like the progression of things. It's like, remember what Foley said. Anyways, moving on, last video from Ric Flair, and Steve Austin, we're going to be going on to probably the most influential talker of several different generations. I would say, though his personal demons got to him, I think he's clean now, and that's Jake Roberts. I think that the ability to really cut those dark, they didn't have to be convoluted, or they didn't have to be mysterious or unbelievable. Here is an everyman. He looks like he could change your oil. But here's some guy with a mullet, a porn mustache, and a beer gut, and a crazy ass, like, giant snake. And he's saying some really dark and some really scary shit when you compare it to the spaceship with the rocket fuel, or Hulkamania, all of these really cartoony things that were going on in the 80s. You've really got to respect that Jake Roberts, what Ric Flair added in bombast to wrestling, Jake Roberts has added in depth and in this sense of character. It wasn't just your nationality was now instantly your character. You could have something where you went to the ring. He admittedly went to the ring with a snake, but he wasn't going to the ring with a flag from any country. And that's good. I think that helps wrestling evolve beyond stereotypes. And I think Jake Roberts, it's amazing, especially with the fact that, like guys like Funk or like Cactus Jack, guys who they weren't Rob Van Dam or Shawn Michaels in the ring, but they worked with what they had, and what they had was uh, really, really just captivating promos. Um, I think that guys like Bray Wyatt today, they try to reach back and they try to be someone like Jake Roberts, but it really can't be replicated. I mean, you wondered. I mean, especially back in the days where people were buying into kayfabe at least a little more before Vince just came out and basically just fucked the whole thing completely, and basically just admitted, yeah, it's all fake, it's all scripted. Your intelligence has been insulted. Now we're gonna change it to sports entertainment, and that's been so much better. Thanks, Vince. Anyways, but regardless of that, Jake Roberts, for what he did, especially in his time, if you consider that cartoonish, like, to quote The Rock, that fucking, like, Fruity Pebbles landscape of just, like, appearing as a guest voice and, like, Scooby Doo. They're doing that again now. I think it might be to work up the fans against Cena as, seeing him as more stale and lame and over promoted. Um, but nevertheless, Jake Roberts, in a landscape of really boring living action figures, just these roided up douchebags who are obviously just, they're just all coked up, and they have no idea what they're saying. I mean, listen to how mushmouth the Warrior is during some of his promos. It makes Hulk Hogan look like fucking Shakespeare. But Jake Roberts being able to do that, it was truly amazing. And I think that everybody on the mic since then owes to him the fact that, it's not just, representing America against insert country here, and or just some cheap pop. I think that he was one of the first guys to really add a layer of depth. Guys like Raven and Mankind, Undertaker, Kane, and in their darker years and less part-time infrequent years where they were more cartoony and shit. Their special effects, superpowers, and shit like that. Uh, but I think the more impactful, legitimate, and important things that all of those guys after Roberts um, did can be partly linked back to him, and I think you have to thank him for that. I think that Jake Roberts, therefore, is one of my favorite wrestlers for the fact that he really created the idea of character. Him and guys like Ric Flair. Um, at least he created the idea of the modern heel, the heel that was a little bit blurring the lines, but not to the point where it was just it had become a tainted parody of itself. Roberts, he had this snake, but he was really just he didn't have to go to crazy lengths. This is what I mean when I say the inflation of violence and of character believability. Now you have to have some crazy family of like inbred like guys in janitor suits following you around, and you have to have face paint and shit. You can't just come out there um, and actually cut a believable promo. I'm gonna kick your ass and I'm gonna feed you to my fucking snake. And I know they didn't swear that much, but it pisses me off the plasticine nature of today's world. But Jake Roberts really he opened up new doors and he opened up new levels of depth, especially for heels. Here's somebody that the real person I'm really not a fan of. JBL is a bully. He's kind of a crabby commentator. He's a douchebag in real life. But the fact is that, kind of like Eric Bischoff, it really makes you hate him as a wrestler too. I mean, have you ever seen JBL as a heel on screen? And he's a really, really good talker. I mean, for as big of a dick as he is with behind the scenes with his hazing, for as just kind of apathetic and halfway present he is for commentary. JBL is a fucking great heel. And that kind of like racist billionaire thing that he was playing up during his feud with Ray, I hated him so much. I just was like, man, I hope Ray. It really made you root for the face, which is what the point of the bad guy is in the first place. That's why the heels end up losing so much of the time, because the main point is to work the fans up for the face. But JBL, he had a hell of a title run, and they tore him down at One Night Stand 2005 as only being like a placeholder champion. But JBL's, though I don't like the real guy, keep in mind I think he's a douche and he's awful backstage. But I think that as a character and as a heel, I really actually bought into him and disliked him and was booing my TV and shit when I was a kid and an adult. JBL, not one of my favorite people, but I guess surprisingly one of my favorite wrestlers, because he was actually one of those people. I never saw face JBL, but he was always one of those guys. Whether it was the APA, but as JBL, which I'm mentioning kind of the gimmick that they appeared as. I'm not putting like Rocky Maivia, where he came out there in Ginny Snuka attire and tried to play up the Samoan thing, or you know. Anyways, regardless of all that, JBL, bad person, good heel. I guess when you're that big of an asshole in real life, it works into your character well. Yeah. Also, the clothesline from hell is stiff as fuck. A fucking real neck breaker finisher. No, not a neck breaker like the wrestling move, but I mean, like, seemed like he was really gonna decapitate somebody with that lariat, and that's another thing. Just going back towards one of the central themes of this video, aside from the countdown, the inflation in wrestling. A guy like JBL with a really stiff clothesline, I think that you see guys using simple finishers like a knee or a clothesline more in a place like Japan, and you see more convoluted finishers in a place like Mexico or America, flips and things that, like the Sin Cara driver, that basically it's like a flip into a sit out reverse DDT. It's almost like the Spike Dudley's, like the Dudley dog, but without the running up the turnbuckle and stuff. Anyways, um, Yeah, I lost my place in my thought. I'm sorry there. Um, yeah. Moving on from that, yeah, JBL, douchebag, great character and all that. And there wasn't really a time where I wasn't booing my TV. Just like, really, he worked me up, even though I was just watching at home. And I've got to thank him for that because he was a great character. Even though, again, I've said this 20 times, he's a dick. Um, okay, number 17, one of the last people on the list. Again, you might have heard of this guy somewhere. Underrated, exposed in New Japan in the 90s. Some guy named Dwayne Johnson. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. He hasn't really gotten his rocks in the business yet. Moving on. No, I'm just fucking around. That's a tired joke after the Steve Austin segment. But The Rock, you know, talk about probably the best talker in wrestling history. Maybe Flair, but Rock, I think when you think back to the probably the face of the company, it couldn't really be Austin and kayfabe because he was always a rebel. He was always feuding with McMahon, so he couldn't be appearing on Conan or the Tonight Show or on some weird Food Network thing where he was semi in character but wearing a ridiculous outfit while they baked cookies or something. It made the whole thing look fucking ridiculous. Made him look like a giant pussy. Anyways, The Rock was the face of the company because he was a face most of the time. Not that he wasn't a heel any of the time, and not that he couldn't do it. He came out one time and asked the fans directly, "You guys think I should be a bad guy or a good guy, face or heel?" And he just walked out all solemn and angry and jaded, like you could see just by his posture. He had the body language. He has the natural charisma. The Rock is, I think, the face of the Attitude Era, which is probably the most fruitful time in WWE's history in terms of um, their monopolization globally and at least nationally in America of wrestling. There's not too many other companies left. Before WCW, ECW, they were keeping them on their toes, keeping them producing a quality product because otherwise they get their asses whipped in the ratings. Um, I think that WWE, the fact that they don't have any competition on their own level, they have companies the size of OVW to compete against. And I know OVW is a farm territory, but you get my point. They have nothing, they have no billion-dollar company to compete against. They're basically able to just throw whatever monkey feces they want at the camera and call it a show. Um, but before that time, back when they still had to try a mythical time in wrestling history, The Rock was really the voice of that time. Whereas Austin was the rebel, the guy who stunnered anyone he felt like out of nowhere. He had loud, what's the word I'm looking for? He had loud, boisterous music, and he drank a bunch of beer and he swore and shit. He was really the vulgar, edgy part of the Attitude Era, whereas The Rock was really the face of it, I think. And I know he spent time as a heel, but The Rock was so beloved. I mean, why does everyone know his catchphrases like the back of his hand? I mean, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that sort of I almost said infidelity. That's not the word I'm looking for. Immortality. There's a reason for that sort of character immortality. Yeah, it's someone driving it home enough with their commitment, with their charisma. I mean, and some of the lines that The Rock said, no one else could have made work. They were so stupid. All the stuff about Kung Pao chicken and Fruity Pebbles, and I don't know. It's like maybe The Rock could appear on Food Network after all. We might have a few recipes for us or something. A guy whose moveset in the ring was not gonna blow you away, but The Rock really is another example of someone who worked with what they had. Some guys like Bret Hart are he made his actions clear in the ring. He was the best wrestler, or he was the excellence of execution. But Bret Hart was not really a talker, and he was never really painted as one. Um, and that wasn't really where his skill set lied. They pushed him towards where his skill set did lie. And I think The Rock is another example of that working really well, in the sense that the people's elbow and the rock bottom, you know, yeah, they got the fans worked up, but I think that The Rock could have farted and the fans would have gotten worked up. He could have literally done Rikishi or Xbox finishers, which were both horrible. And if I made a worst finishers list, would definitely be on there, and I may do that. Um, but The Rock was somebody who really worked with their natural charisma and acting skills, even though he was kind of green when he first got there. They eventually got away from, oh, he's Samoan, and that's his gimmick, and he was a football player in college, but he was green when he first got there. But I think once they really handed him the mic, it was kind of like when they handed Chris Jericho the mic. Chris Jericho was an amazing technical wrestler, mind you, but I think that both of them really blossomed when they were actually able to talk some. Um, anyways, though, going from like a completely white bread, technical wrestler, and going from a blue chip prospect, that being your gimmick, to actually evolving to someone who had really the millions and millions. That's not an exaggeration. Um, and The Rock, his career was a little bit before I started watching mostly, but having watched numerous matches of him and all the promos, he could cut promos with a guy like John Cena, and it would be entertaining. And the build, I think, was often the best part of, that's what people go back for, is the best Rock promos, the funniest Rock moments. No matter what you search in correlation to wrestling, you'll probably have that come up in the first like 5 videos. And that's because everyone, I think, remembers The Rock for being the voice of wrestling. And he really is. And he really always will be. Um, because as a talker, he can come back. Even if it's as a special guest referee, even if WWE hires him part time, kind of like SNL has Alec Baldwin. Even if The Rock comes back as an evil GM, people will still remember his catchphrases and they'll still be Googling him, and I think that's why The Rock is one of the not only the best wrestlers ever, but one of my favorites. Um, he carried, I think, he helped carry the business through the best time business wise, I think, that they've really ever gone through. And things have petered out a lot since then, and I think him leaving, which is, I think, a black mark on his record in terms of as a wrestler, in terms of resiliency, he left. So, yeah, he did kind of stab us all in the back, and things petered out after he left, and wrestling started being boring, and the business started slipping. But it was just one of those negative couple years after the Attitude Era where people started getting hurt just in droves. And um, nevertheless, he left for Hollywood. So, regardless of what The Rock is guilty of in the past, and though he hasn't really had any amazing matches since like 2002, I think The Rock, again, will live on forever because of being the voice of wrestling. Kind of how Ric Flair and Jake Roberts innovated the idea of like the classic heel, either that archetype of the guy who was really cocky, or the guy who was Jake Roberts innovated the idea of a dark heel, someone who wasn't just, way too up on their own ego, somebody who actually had a little bit more of a like a crazy unstable kind of like, Jake Roberts really seemed like a nutcase. Like he would do anything. He really would feed you to his snake. At least it felt that way, and he made wrestling feel real, which even with a crazy character like that, over the top, carrying your snake around while wearing tights, in a landscape of living action figures, he made that work. And I think that a guy like The Rock made over the top character work in a time of really cynical, really mean, really like, chanting, what they thought on their minds without restraint. Uh, any restraint or any holding back. The Rock made an over the top character work in a time when the fans really. The reaction should have been, I think, more like Eugene at One Night Stand 2005, where they would have really like biblically stoned him if they had rocks. Um, and I don't mean The Rock. That's just coincidence. Anyways, let's go on to number 18, one of wrestling's Saddest stories in Eddie Guerrero. Um, died early. WWE tried to kind of pole vault off the death sympathy of his name to push Rey Mysterio.